Good day, citizens, and welcome to this week's edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. And it's a bit different than any Thomas Jefferson Hour I think we've ever done. Maybe I'm wrong, but Clay, you allowed me to interview you about your new book, and it led to a pretty interesting conversation. I hope that folks who are not enamored with North Dakota in the way that you and I are will find it interesting.
Well, I'm from North Dakota. I love North Dakota. And when I travel, people say, really? North Dakota? And professionally, people have sort of looked down on me a little, like, how can what you do be very interesting if it emanates from North Dakota? So we all understand that. But I love this place. I am shaped by this place, as I know you are shaped by this place. And I'm a Jeffersonian in large part because I'm a North Dakotan. When I was growing up, we were a family farm state, and family farming had mythological, when you said family farming, that was like a sacred phrase about these hardworking people who lived quietly on the land and provided their own food and food for the world. And they were simple in the best sense of the word simple, and they believed that they were doing something that had virtue and even nobility. They were growing food for a hungry world. That's all changing now, David, and it's not changing, in my opinion, for the good. But I love this place, and I wanted to write a love song to North Dakota. But you can't love a place without also trying to reckon with what's not really in harmony in the place. And we have several disharmonies. First of all, we have an unsustainable economic model of extraction. That's the one that's killing the planet, or certainly endangering it. Our relations with Native Americans have been, on the whole, pretty bad. We're still occupying North Dakota, and we're still not listening very much to this other culture that was here first and had really found a way to live here. Our conservation ethic is pretty weak in North Dakota, and it shows it because we have failed to protect some of the greatest places in the state from runaway economic exploitation. And there's just the problem of the plight of rural America, that there's really no answer. People today want to be with it. They want to be connected. They want to be where the action is. And it used to be, we were isolated, but we weren't really aware of how isolated we are. But now, when your television gets 700 channels and your device can see anything in the world instantaneously, young people want more. And so our small towns are emptying out. And if you want people to stay, the question is, what would that take? Because whatever we love about North Dakota, it is an acquired taste. You've got to have a certain type of ruggedness, a certain commitment to perseverance against reason to want to live here. And so I want to do that, but I want the payoff to be that you gain so much from that little sacrifice that you're just glad to be here. And I don't always feel that. And I feel it less now that the state has really climbed on this sort of Sean Hannity bandwagon.
A phrase that you came up with during the conversation, and I don't know if it's your phrase or not, but it's a good one, and that is culture of grievance. Is that yours?
It's my formulation, but it's a very widespread idea now.
But it's exactly right. And you talk in the show, and I didn't rant about it a lot, but there are a couple of really right-wing radio people, in our area,
and they're extremely popular, by the way.
And I don't get a chance to listen to the radio when I'm at work. Obviously, my ears are occupied. But on the days that I drive to work rather than walk to work, I will invariably have it on the AM radio station. And some of the stuff that, that phrase, culture of grievance, it's like, people complaining about everything from having to wear masks. And you struck on it. I mean, things are better for North Dakotans than they've ever been. And it's like, you can't do the simplest thing. Don't you love this country? What's wrong with you? Quit whining about it. But it's a business. That's what I keep coming back to, is that it's a business. These guys that are on the radio are funded by the people that they complain for.
Well, yes, but they also are tapping the same thing that I think Donald Trump tapped, which is
They say the same thing about us. They could just flip that around on us, probably, right?
well, I don't know. I think that I see. I'm sure they do say that if they listen at all, but I don't think that it's fair. I think that what they're tapping is fear. Things are changing so fast.
Yeah.
Cultural tolerance in a whole set of ways has moved fast.
It scares people.
People are frightened. They feel that their America is being undermined. And they also know, and I mean, you have to talk about this, even if you don't like to. People understand the demographics, that we are going to be a minority, majority country by 2070, and in some places a lot sooner, which means that the idea that America is a white nation with some minorities is no longer going to be true. We're going to be a multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic nation, and white people are going to be one of the biggest minorities, but they are going to be the minority, and people are terrified by this. I mean, they're actually frightened, anxious, and terrified by this, and they don't know what it portends. But for many people, it doesn't portend anything that they want, and so they're trying desperately to put their hand in that dike or hold back the tsunami, or whatever metaphor you want to use for it. And along come demagogues like Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or some political figures, and they play to that fear. They say, your fear is just, and here's why: because someone somewhere is trying to take your job. Your fear is just because terrorists are infiltrating the country from our southern borders. Your fears are just because the feminazis are taking over our culture. Your fear is just because the professors at our universities are teaching your children to hate America. And so it's just all this set of talking points, and some of them have some slender basis in truth, but all these talking points saying your fear is just, and there's an enemy that's trying to destroy this country. It's the Democrat, it's the liberals, it's the socialists, it's this. And people are not really wrestling with the argumentation. They're just hearing your fear is just. And so that is demagogic rhetoric. It's working. And it's working because the people are not idiots. They're not bigots. They're not racists, although some are. It's working because the people are fearful. We don't know what's coming.
And it's happening so fast.
I want people to buy this book. You know, I for the first time in my life, I feel like, yes, I have said what I want to say. If I died tomorrow, I would say nunc dimittis. I got to say what I wanted to say. I want to create a statewide conversation, and if possible, a broader conversation, because the plight of rural America is not North Dakota. It's California. It's upstate New York. It's Western Massachusetts. It's Ohio. Rural America is in deep trouble everywhere. Rural America is in trouble, and nobody knows how to fix it. I don't know how to fix it, but I think I know what North Dakota could do to make itself more attractive. But this is not just about North Dakota. This is about the Great Plains, certainly, but really about if you go to Eastern Washington or Eastern California, the same problems that are bedeviling the Great Plains are bedeviling them. And nobody has figured this out, because in a sense, the cat got out of the bag. You know, life is so dynamic in cities. There's so much there for people that just isn't available in the small towns of America, and people want it, and they're not going to be okay with not having access to it.
We need to get to the show. This is podcast intro is growing longer by the moment. And so one last time, we would encourage you to look for Clay's new book, The Language of Cottonwoods. And also, we would encourage you to support the show.
One of the ways you can support this program is participating in the guitar auction. Kevin Miterman of Thompson, North Dakota, our great instrument maker who made my ukulele and makes world-class guitars, has donated a guitar made of heritage wood from the Red River Valley. It's a beautiful, beautiful instrument. You can see it at jeffersonhour.com. And we are having an auction from May 15th to May 31st. There's a minimum bid, but this is not just a guitar. This is a magnificent guitar, and the proceeds will come to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. So that's a way, if you're interested in having a very fine piece of guitar by a master craftsman, go to the website, and between May 15th and May 31st, this auction on this Red River Valley heritage guitar. Amazing, David. Let's listen to the show.
Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson, and sometimes your weekly conversation with the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the noted author, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. And it is he who is seated across from me virtually this week. And good day to you, sir.
Well, my friend, the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. We haven't been in the same room now for more than a year, and yet, thanks to the technologies of our time, we've made it work.
Yeah, this is different today because we're actually doing this on Zoom. We can see one another.
It's a little odd, normally you have me in some cubby in your cavernous studio, and I can only see the little tiny room that I'm in. Now I can actually watch you smirking and frowning and mugging and all the things you do.
Well, I bring you to the show this week because rather than Jefferson, and not that it's always my decision, but this week it was, and I bring you to the conversation this week because it's sort of a milestone for you. You have a new book coming out. Now, we're recording this towards the end of April, and your book comes out in May. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I'm glad you said that this was your idea. I'm always a little diffident about talking about these things, but there's a sea change here. This is my 14th book, I think. The first advance copies came late last week in a box. I opened it up and there it was. I'm showing it to you at this moment. And I was thrilled. I was happy in a way that I am seldom that happy. And just thinking, if I were struck by lightning on June 1st and killed, I will have said what I want to say about the most important subject in my life, which is the Great Plains and the future of North Dakota. So it's an odd feeling. Normally I do something and I see it in the rearview mirror almost immediately and I think, what's next? And this time I'm thinking, I want this book to have a chance to create at least a conversation throughout North Dakota about who we are, what we value, how we identify ourselves, what we cherish, what sort of future we think we have. Why is North Dakota different, say, from Montana or Tennessee? Is there something about North Dakota? It's the last visited state and it's the least visited state. It's the butt of national jokes. Even now, most people who are living somewhere else couldn't name North Dakota. They might, if you said name the 50 states, they'd get California, they'd get Texas, they'd get Mississippi, they'd get New York. When they get to that last group of 10 or 12, and North Dakota would be in that sort of flyover zone. So I have a special feeling about this book, David, and I hope that it gets a reading beyond North Dakota, because in some ways it's really a book about rural identity and the challenge of rural America.
Yeah, you have promised me a copy of this, and I don't doubt that you shall hand one to me at some point when we see each other or you drive by, as you put it. But I did want to talk to you about it, and maybe you can help me understand some of the parts of the book. I was looking at you say 14 books that you've written. I don't know if it was your first, but it was one of your earliest ones, and that was Message on the Wind, A Spiritual Odyssey on the Northern Plains, which was published in May of 2002. So May is a big book month for you. And it's kind of an arc from that to this, because the descriptor for that book says, I call it the Sacred Corridor. That's a poetic name for a district that most people would do anything to avoid, a corridor travelers pass through as quickly as possible with their souls and windows closed, and described later as the flattest, dreariest, most isolated country they have ever seen.
And that's true.
Well, I don't know if it's really true. I mean, it reads well, and it kind of, the joke is, oh, North Dakota, that's where Mount Rushmore is, right?
Look, North Dakota is an acquired taste. One of the first chapters of the book is that North Dakota is an acquired taste. It's not for the faint of heart. We have long, brutal winters. The wind blows a lot and sometimes fiercely. The amenities are not what they would be in, say, Minneapolis or Denver or Seattle or any number of other places. We're a long way from everything, and we're still kind of a little bit locked into our old agrarian paradigm, which I cherish. So we're not for everybody. just the winters alone are enough that North Dakotans who have achieved some wealth and are retired get second homes in Phoenix or Scottsdale or Florida or Hemet, California, and they flee when the really severe weather comes. And as I say in the book, and as you know, David, I love North Dakota right to the core of my heart. But I say, nobody moves here. Nobody says on a Thursday, honey, what if we moved to North Dakota? Wouldn't that be something? People move to New Mexico, they move to Colorado, they move to Florida, they move to all sorts of places. They don't move here. People come here because there's work here. People are here because they grew up here. They have kin here. The family graves are here. But North Dakota is an acquired taste. And I do ask in the book, and I don't mean to sound critical, but I ask, what rational person would live here?
But back to the descriptor of that early book, Message on the Winds, is because I see in your writing this arc that goes through North Dakota and Jeffersonian principles. I mean, that pops up everywhere. You write, this book is a love song to that lonely country. I call it the landscape of the improbable. The promise of America is that we will create a society equal to the magnificence of the continent on which we have planted it. It is not quite too late. I remember how inspired I felt the first time I heard Wallace Stegner's phrase, a society to match the landscape. That's good. And the people who don't know North Dakota, I mean, the romance starts at our western border in Montana, the Old West. But really, that romance starts with Theodore Roosevelt in the Badlands of western North Dakota, for me anyway.
Roosevelt came to the Badlands in September of 1883 to kill a buffalo. He came to our Badlands because the railroad could get him there 5 days out from New York. He got his buffalo on September 20th, 1883. It still is on display in the North Room at Sagamore Hill on Long Island. While he was here, he fell in love with this place. He saw it as one of the last frontiers. He thought the Badlands were starkly and intriguingly beautiful. He thought he could maybe get a little sliver of that frontier life that he associated with Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone and George Rogers Clark. So he invested in 2 ranches in the Little Missouri River Valley, the Maltese Cross, and then the Elkhorn. He spent about 4 years off and on out here, and he later said that he would never have been the president of the United States had it not been for his time in North Dakota. So that's an important part of our story. And as you know, I've been heavily involved in Roosevelt-related activities since I moved back here 16 years ago now. But that's certainly the most dramatic landscape in North Dakota. It's our number one tourist zone. But if you think about it, and I mean no disrespect, it's sort of North Dakota's Montana. Most of North Dakota doesn't look that way. Most of North Dakota is farmland, rolling hills, some drama in the landscape, but someone traveling through from somewhere else would say, my, that's flat. My, that's treeless.
Yeah, but they'd say that about Kansas, and they'd say that about Nebraska. And so I don't know how much weight I'm going to give to that. You brought up one president, I'll bring up another, Jefferson. Jefferson, oftentimes we talk about North Dakota when Jefferson is here. And I know a lot of that has to do with the fact that Lewis and Clark were here, and he received a lot of reports. Beyond the fact that Jefferson would say no rational human being would live where it got so cold, I don't know what Jefferson would think of North Dakota.
Well, he would have thought better of it before, when we really were a family farm state. So, the business of North Dakota has been extraction. First, we extracted beaver skins, and then buffalo skins and bones. And then later we began to extract wheat and oats and potatoes and sunflower seeds and sugar beets and so on, cattle. And so it's been an extraction economy. But when North Dakota was settled by the Homestead Act, beginning in the 1860s, but here not until the 1880s, there was a farm on every quarter section. So at one time there were about 40,000 farms in North Dakota, and they were all farmy farms with, some pigs and some chickens and some calves and some dairy to milk and some pasturage and some fields. And so we were truly a family farm state. The number one descriptor, family farms, not farms, family farms. Well, that's been changing for a long time and is changing very, very quickly now.
One of the things that North Dakota is noted for now, we weren't in earlier times, but we are now, is how conservative we are. And, it'd be interesting to get your take on why that is.
Well, I think it's changed. So in the early period of North Dakota statehood came in 1889, so we're very young. There were populist responses to the sense of being an economic colony of outside interests, the railroads, the milling industry in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And the sense was that North Dakota was sort of an economic colony, and we hated that exploitation. So we had a populist movement and the Nonpartisan League and so on. There's always been a grievance culture in North Dakota from the beginning. But somewhere after the Reagan Revolution in 1980, the grievance moved from what corporations do to us to the federal government instead. And so North Dakotans sort of got on the bandwagon of the Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson grievance parade. And we have really become very deeply embedded in that grievance culture. And which is funny, David, because North Dakota has always gotten back from the federal government 1.5 times for every dollar that we send in. So we send in $100, we get 150 back. You could not have had a North Dakota without the Homestead Act, the Transcontinental Railroads, the Interstate Highway Act, the great dams on the Missouri River, the farm program, the Air Force bases, the FEMA and disaster programs. North Dakota has been deeply dependent upon the federal government from the beginning until this day, and yet we pretend that we're these rugged individualists who don't need any outside control. Thank you very much.
We need to take a short break. When we come back, as I said, I haven't received a copy of the book, but I do have the chapters in front of me.
Stop whining about that, really.
Yeah. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you more specifically about some of the chapters in your book and what you were trying to convey in them.
Certainly. Yes, of course. Thank you.
We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation. Well, our weekly conversation this week is with the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, who has a brand new book coming out this month, your 14th, you say, and it is titled The Language of Cottonwoods, Essays on the Future of North Dakota. And while we would always encourage you to support your local bookstore, I'm certain you can find it on Amazon by this time, sir.
It's on Barnes & Noble and Amazon, but you can ask your local bookstore to get it. It'll be distributed as a national distributor. It's published by Kohler Press in the Chesapeake in Norfolk, but you can get it more quickly, probably through Amazon and barnesandnoble.coms. And I'm also doing an audio recording of the book, so it'll be available in a number of ways, and it's already available as an ebook.
Oh, that's good. We've already had people who have written in hoping that you would do that, make an audiobook of it. So I wanted to go through some of the chapters. I'm reading some of the descriptors here, and what is the book about? It is about a place that Eric Severide called a large rectangular blank spot in the nation's mind, and you sort of already addressed that.
We certainly are that, have been that. Even if you watch modern sitcoms or cop dramas, there's always someone about every fifth episode who says, like, what do you think I'm going to do? Go live in North Dakota? I mean, there's always that sense that North Dakota is the last place that any rational person would ever choose to live. There's a kind of an absurdity factor. And Severide's from Velva, North Dakota. He's one of the greatest North Dakotans. He's the man who used to be on CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite between 1963 and 1977. And he was the nation's conscience and sort of our chief commentator, and brilliant. I'm a huge fan of Eric Severide, and I try to model my own public discourse in a sense after his, and he's a North Dakotan. So, but he said this, he said, North Dakota is a large rectangular blank spot in the nation's mind. I love that. And that's true. And it's always going to be true. There's not much we can do about it. We don't have any professional sports teams. We don't have the greatest opera in the world. And I mean no disrespect, but in many towns in North Dakota, Applebee's would be the best restaurant that's within 100 miles. This is not New York City or Los Angeles or Greenwich Village. This is sort of a basic place in the Maslowian hierarchy where we farm, we extract minerals, coal and oil and natural gas. There's farm-related activity, although there's almost no industry in the state of North Dakota. We have a very big K through 12 system and a very large higher educational system in the state, and that's sort of what North Dakota is.
You write about the book, you say, we are neither Midwest nor West, but caught uneasily in between. I thought that was very interesting and probably true.
So we know what Midwest means. Fargo is now technically in North Dakota, but it's a Midwestern city now. Midwest is lots of towns, lots of rain, well-groomed neighborhoods, farming, corn, potatoes, oats, wheat, etc., soybeans. And North Dakota is a farm state to this day, but as you get west of the Missouri River, you move into grazing country, into the sort of the American West on a small scale. And so the western part of the state sort of leans west towards Montana to Billings and Bozeman and Denver. And the eastern, I'd say 3/5 of the state, or even 2/3 of the state, leans east towards Minneapolis and to Iowa and to the Great Lakes and so on. And so North Dakota is caught in between, whereas Montana is definitely a Western state and Minnesota is definitely a Midwestern state. North Dakota has this neither quite this nor quite that problem, and I think it's hurt us. And I'm fascinated by this, David. And again, I don't mean to be critical, but we have the weakest literature of any of the states around us. Montana has a very strong state literature. South Dakota better than ours. Minnesota better than ours, Saskatchewan and Manitoba better. And why is it? We're not backward. In fact, we may be better educated per capita than those other places, but we have not developed a very distinguished literature. Now, there are some very fine authors here, and there are some excellent books. I think of Larry Wywody or Louise Erdrich. There definitely is good writing here, but compared to these other places, much lower plateau. And I think it's not because we're dumb or that we lack literary ambition out here. I think it's because we're not quite sure who we are. And in a second way, we're not quite sure who we are, David. We used to be family farmers. It was pretty clunky. We weren't very sophisticated, but we knew what we were doing. And what we were doing, we knew was important. We knew that we were feeding people. We were feeding the world. And there's a dignity and even a nobility in that. And now that the family farm paradigm is slipping away from us into some kind of robotic industrial gigantism in agriculture, that family farm ethos, which is the centerpiece of North Dakota life, is disappearing fast. And so that, I think, contributes to our identity crisis.
That's really insightful. I'm going to have to take some time.
You should read this book.
I might, if I get.
I'll put a copy in your hands. Thank you.
I'm going to have to think about that a bit, because you talked earlier. You think back to North Dakota during the early 1900s, and it was a radical place of. We're not going to let anybody tell us what to do. I mean, the first state bank, the first state mill, and that's all lost now.
We have a socialist state bank from the 1920s. We have a socialist state mill and elevator from that period. We're the only place.
But you got to be careful with that word socialist, because what it was is farmers saying, those guys that are the big corporate people that are taking all of our profits and making it impossible for us to survive, we're not going to take this anymore. And that's a far cry from socialism.
Well, the farmers of the state said, we're buying a state bank. The state will own the bank. The state will own the funds.
But you know what I'm saying.
All I'm saying is that we have a radical tradition of protest and populism. And today, that very energy still exists in North Dakota, but it exists in two ways, David. You've seen them both. One is this exaggerated distaste for the federal government, which I think is just nuts, considering how much we have benefited historically from the national government to this day. And the second part is any outsiders telling us what to do. So when outsiders come to North Dakota, say in the pipeline catastrophe of 2016 and 2017, North Dakotans were offended that outsiders would travel here from Europe or from Hollywood to come and join the protest. It no longer felt legitimate to most North Dakotans when outsiders would dare to try to tell us who we are. And now you're seeing it. Amazon is thinking of putting in a facility in Fargo, and many North Dakotans are worried about that, because what if they try to make us more enlightened? What if they try to make us have same-sex bathrooms? What if they try to encourage us to be more welcoming of eccentricity? North Dakotans are really worried about somebody who's not one of us trying to tell us how we should live. And I get that, but I think it's way in excess of any rational approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that, having decades ago, having a production studio, I worked with a lot of politicians, because back then they needed a studio to do their spots. And I was very proud. I worked with both major parties, and they all felt comfortable coming in. But it was obvious that either party that took the tack of outsiders telling us what to do, it worked. It just really, really worked.
Let me give you another one that's closer to your own family. You're married to a woman who's played a very significant role in trying to conserve the integrity of the Little Missouri River Valley and the Badlands against unwise industrial choices. And so one of the other arguments of my book is that we lack a serious conservation ethic in North Dakota, that things happen in North Dakota that couldn't happen near Glacier National Park. They couldn't happen in California. They couldn't happen in Oregon or Washington or even Colorado or Montana. That there is a lack of a feeling in the state that we have to find some things that we want to preserve from economic development, and then we have to agree to set them aside and to protect them, or we have to fight against those who would try to exploit them. And I have lived in a lot of different places, including Colorado, including in Oregon, including in California. And in every one of the other places that I have ever lived, there's a stronger conservation ethic than there is in the state of North Dakota. And it's hurt us. We need to develop this. And for all the work that Jan and people like her have done, the average North Dakotan, you tell me if I'm wrong, the average North Dakotan, and there's 750,000 of us, during the last 10 years when the oil boom was really something out here, their attitude was not particularly different from Sarah Palin's. Drill, baby, drill.
Well, I think there again, we can go back to, I can draw on conversations I've had with President Jefferson, and talking about, him at Monticello looking west. There was so much there. How could, in spite of the fact that he at one time called cutting a tree down tantamount to murder, there was so much there. How could we ever worry? There was enough for the hundredths and thousandth generation. And I think there's some of that still existed in North Dakota. People would go out to that barren land and say, well, why not? Go ahead, do whatever you want. But we know now that what we're going to be left with, and possibly in our lifetime, is an infrastructure that is useless. I watched the Academy Awards and saw these multiple commercials for the brand new Cadillacs that are all electric and will go 300 miles without a charge. That's the future. And for some reason, we seem to think it's still stuck in the ground. It's not going to last.
I agree. We're heading towards a post-carbon future. It probably won't come within my lifetime, but it certainly is coming. And that's going to be an issue because North Dakota, for the past 15 years at least, has used carbon extraction taxes to be really the basis of our prosperity. That can't continue. But here's the paradox for me, David, and I wonder where you are with this. What I love most about North Dakota is the outback, the wind, the buttes, the ridges, the coulees, the rolling hills, the grass that extends in every direction seemingly forever. When you're out there in a lonely place where you're miles from anything significant and you believe you're kind of part of an American Plains or an American Serengeti, That's what I love most about North Dakota. And that's what North Dakotans love least about North Dakota. And so they think there's nothing out there. Go ahead and drill it. I mean, there's nothing there. Most North Dakotans are now separated from the land, and they underappreciate the subtle magnificence of the plains, and they regard it as you got to do something with it. So I guess you may as well mine it.
I think there's a couple of things that are going to happen maybe within our lifetime, certainly shortly after our lifetime, and that is the importance of nature to one's own health. And I'm not talking about, getting out and getting exercise. I'm talking about what Theodore Roosevelt experienced in his time of anguish. He came here and he healed himself. And in great part, and I've learned this from you, in great part, that was because of the land that he spent his time on.
The second last chapter of this book is called The Future of North Dakota. And I talk about the future throughout, but I make suggestions, and you're exactly right. I think that people in the middle and the second half of the 21st century are going to want to know more about where their food comes from. They're going to want to know what animals are in their diet. They're going to want to have a better understanding of how our food supply is created, how it's preserved, how it's packaged, how it's transported. And there's going to be a local foods movement that already exists in the country and is going to be more pronounced over time. People are going to want conservation vacations or nature vacations where they get away from things and they get into a more basic infrastructure like ours, and they can sleep outside and they can go hiking and they can refresh themselves in a largely uncompromised environment. That's coming. I think that if North Dakota would have a new Homestead Act, which we could easily do, and create deep economic incentives for young people to have 10 acres, 12 acres, up to 40 acres, and that they would be farm to table or CSA or niche farming or organic farming or small vineyards. And we gave them training, and we had low or no interest loans for them. And we encouraged them to come and made this land available to them at a price that they could afford to lease or buy, I think, and have equipment scaled to that small sort of agriculture and reduce the petrochemical addiction of our agriculture. That's going to be a huge issue in the 21st century. So if we would reposition ourselves as a kind of a new frontier for people to come and to do things that are central to the North Dakota tradition, but are done in a more holistic, more sustainable, more environmentally sound way, one that endangers the planet less, I think that would be huge. But we have to be willing, David, to open ourselves to that. We have to make that happen. That won't just happen. And meanwhile, our legislature, and it only really reflects the habits of the heart, does a lot of things that send signals to young, dynamic people that maybe you don't want to move here, that there's kind of a red state. We're not going to have no transgender athletes on our teams. We're not going to have there's this kind of a reactionary 1952 retro politics that says we ain't going to get on board with all these weird changes that are happening in this country. And that's not going to encourage young people to cast their lots with us. They want to live where they feel there is a sympathy for a wider, more tolerant, more eccentric matrix of what human possibility is. And so we have to get over this kind of deep red state grievance culture, or we're just stuck with our own population base. But we're not going to import young people if they think this is a reactionary place.
That's a real Jeffersonian optimistic vision. I applaud you for that, sir. That's long-standing joke about North Dakota. Yeah, here we export wheat and children. There's some truth to that. And what you're talking about is, to me, and I might be showing my own personal opinion too much for the show, but to me, it's a sustainable plan for a future, whereas the extraction of minerals, oil in particular, is not sustainable. There's not going to be a market for it. In the meantime, Saudi Arabia and Russia are going to undercut our prices forever while they can get money for it.
And plus, if you look at agriculture, so we have a state that's 360 miles wide and a little over 200 miles high. We have a lot of land, and most of it is arable, most of it is farmable, and that which is not farmable, you graze. It's ranch land. With what's happening in robotics and with artificial intelligence and drones, it's going to sound crazy, but the time is going to come within this century when you could have 200 farms in North Dakota that would farm every acre. And you wouldn't have to have people in there at all except to change chips and to, do some maintenance. But we're moving towards a brave new world of robotic agriculture in which tens of thousands of acres will be handled better in some respects by robotic computer-driven machines than by human beings living on the land. And so this is a real threat to North Dakota. Great for food production, marvelous, more efficient than ever probably. But if you believe in the culture and agriculture, for every farm, there is a town that supplies food. There's a bar, there's a post office, there's an implement dealership. You take the people on the farms out of North Dakota, there's no particular reason to keep North Dakota alive. So that's another revolution we're going to have to brace ourselves for.
We need to take a short break, Clay. When we come back, I'd like to talk to you more about the book and your third major theme of the book, which is our relationships with Native Americans, if that's all right.
Of course.
We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to The Thomas Jefferson Hour. Welcome back to The Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation, sometimes with President Thomas Jefferson, oftentimes about President Thomas Jefferson. This week, we're talking with the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, Mr. Clay Jenkinson, who has a new book out. And we took our break, Clay. I said when I came back, I wanted to talk to you about what you refer to as your third major theme of the book, which is how we have to transform our relations with Native Americans. Now, earlier you talked about the struggles of culture, literature in North Dakota. But to me, one of the greatest strengths we have as far as culture are the Native Americans that live here. And it's hidden from many citizens, but their culture is incredibly strong. And you know that from firsthand experience.
Well, first of all, let me say that this is a very Jeffersonian book. I am a Jeffersonian. Jefferson changed the whole nature of my thinking. I've been a Jeffersonian now for 30 years. And by that, I mean humans are up to it, that we can proactively build a future, that we should be looking to the future. And so many of us are just drawn on in life, and we become reactors. We absorb and we react. And that's not going to be enough for the future of North Dakota. And I think it's not going to be enough for the future of this country. So it's a Jeffersonian book. And before I answer your question, I also want to say the cover, I'm just totally in love with. It was a painting done by a friend of mine named Katrina Case. And I asked her to paint the Badlands. I said I needed a thunderstorm. I said I needed a blue little Missouri River, some cottonwoods in early October when they're at their most golden. I said I need a couple of dead cottonwoods because there always are some out there. And I said, and put somewhere in this little benchland a little oil rig because that's North Dakota too. And she did an absolutely magnificent job. People can go to Katrina Case, Google her, and you'll see her artwork. And so that is spectacular. Sometimes you can judge a book by its cover, and this is one of those times. So I learned some of this from you. Much of this I learned from you. I've worked with Native Americans all my life, off and on, and it's Native American culture is of extraordinary importance to me. And I think one of the greatest things about living in North Dakota is that we have Native peoples here. We have Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara, Lakota, Dakota, Ojibwe, and Assiniboine peoples here. And most North Dakotans, I'm afraid, are either indifferent to that or maybe even a little hostile to that. And I think it's a terrible mistake. I think one of the greatest things about this place is that there is an Indian presence, a Native American presence, and the Lakota are really in an advanced period of cultural resurgence and political assertiveness. And the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara are in the sweet spot of the Bakken oil boom and are benefiting in lots of ways, and of course troubled too in some ways by all that's happening in that respect. And so we need to be much more in a dialogue. I say at the beginning of the book, the two cultures really lead mostly parallel lives. you're one of the intersections, and you've taught me this. And it's so important for non-Indian people to listen, 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 listen. And if you can do that, Native Americans are so generous. They're so funny. They have an exquisite sense of humor. They have stories to tell. They'll tease you. They'll tease themselves. They're not angry. They just want respect, and for us to stop telling them what they need to do and start listening to what their needs are and help them, or get out of the way, which is equally important in many instances. And so you've made a career of this. You've done really distinguished work in this way. And so in the book, I talk about our relations with Native Americans many different times. And in the end, I actually have an appendix which says, how are we going to proceed? And it begins with listening. But I also say things like, for most Native Americans are not really caught up in the public discourse that most of us are engaged in. They have other things going on. But when they are interested in the public issue, they expect to be heard. They don't weigh in often, but when they do, they mean it. And when they say that we're engaged in cultural appropriation, that is taking stuff from their cultures without having earned it or without permission, they mean it. They get to decide that. And when they are less prosperous than the rest of us, we have to realize that that's not a choice they've made. That's a result of hundreds of years of colonial activity. And so if we say, well, why are they poor? Or why is there an infant mortality rate? Or, et cetera. We're asking the wrong questions. We need to look through that. Yes, it's messy. They admit some of it is messy, but they have rich, deep traditional cultures, really wonderful family life, a great respect for elders, a lovely tradition of storytelling, mutual respect, non-hierarchical systems in many important ways. And so we need to heal ourselves. We non-natives, we need to heal ourselves and heal with them. And if we did that, just think of it, David. I mean, I'm sounding like a Jeffersonian optimist here, but imagine if there were a significant cultural rapprochement and reconciliation between the two North Dakotas, and we suddenly were helping each other flourish. This would be remarkable, and tourists would come in from all over the world to see Native Americans living and thriving.
You have the benefit that I don't, of having traveled the world and you lived in another country for an extended period of time in your younger years, and you travel continually. I have not, but 45 miles south of the town that I live in, there is another country. And as you said, listen, listen, listen. Being exposed to another culture so far different than your own opens your mind in ways you can't really imagine. And so that's a thing I am very grateful for. And I wish more people could experience that.
I don't want to be a Pollyanna, David, but I think if you look at us, at white, industrial, first world, especially America, we have lived so well. We have such material advantage. We're so prosperous. We have so many gadgets. We have everything. But we have endangered the health of the planet. I mean, there's no question that this industrial paradigm, and we're not the only ones, of course, but we're the king of this, is actually endangering the biosphere. It's endangering the planet. Now, maybe it's not as severe as some think, but it's severe. Native Americans had a different operating system. They had a different way of seeing, and it was that everything is legitimate and everything has its own spiritual dimension, and humans are not necessarily the king of everything. We're a species among other interesting species, and that there has to be some cultural restraining mechanism on extraction. And we could learn from this. In other words, there are plenty of things wrong with Indian America. Nobody wants to pretend otherwise, but there's so much that's right about it. And if we could listen to that notion that you don't just have an unlimited license to take anything you want in nature and kill it, exploit it, turn it into a product, that's not a license that humans actually have, that there has to be a deeper connectivity and a deeper mutual respect across species lines if you want to have a sustainable culture. Don't you think that's true?
I do. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and that was talking about this arc of the populists forming a state bank to what we've become today, which I think you called a grievance society or grievance culture. We're recording this in North Dakota. It's going to be broadcast on the flagship public radio station. Um, and I don't want to lose everybody from my own state. Why should people who are part of what you call the grievance culture even be interested in this?
Well, first of all, the book is a love song to North Dakota. I really do love this place, and I make fun of it in a certain kind of lovely, teasing way at times, but I love it and I believe in it. I moved back to North Dakota when I could have easily lived somewhere else because I wanted to be here. And I wrote this book, which took 2 years. In a sense, it took a lifetime, but took 2 years to formulate because I think I have something to say. And I think that it's a life affirming thing to say. I'm not just criticizing this place. I'm an idealist. First of all, I want North Dakota to survive. Secondly, I want North Dakota to thrive. And third, I want America to recover. And so the heartland used to be the residuum of all that was right in my mind about America. And now the heartland is in a diseased, disrupted, bad mood. And why? I drive around North Dakota. We're prosperous. We've never been as prosperous as we are. Things are going so well here. And you think, what are people angry about? What is there to be angry about? This is the best time for North Dakota in its entire history without any possible debate. And there is more money rolling around the state, more jobs, more opportunity, better amenities. We're wired to the world. We have good transportation networks. People can travel to Disney World or to Paris or to Prague or to Myanmar at will. There's never been a time in the history of the United States when North Dakota has done better than it's doing right now. So why are we not happy and relaxed? Why are we so edgy? Most North Dakotans are so much better than the angry discourse that and the talking points that you hear all the time. In other words, North Dakotans are decent. They're thoughtful. They're generous. They're neighborly. They're terrific in a crisis. They're practical. They can do stuff. They can weld. They can change tires. They can change oil. They can put new rings in an engine. They can wire their Quonset. I mean, North Dakotans have enormous practical skill, and they're resourceful, and they don't mope. They just get out in their galoshes and go do things. And they're an amazing people. I mean, really just exemplary Jeffersonian agrarians. That's who we have been, and that's who we are. And yet there's kind of I think a false patina of anger and grievance that has come over the top of that. And I don't think it's really true. I think when I hear North Dakotans or Minnesotans, it's not just here, or rural people generally, talk about conspiracies and stolen elections and sex trafficking in pizza parlors and this and that, I think that's just noise that has been created, and it has taken advantage of whatever's unfulfilled in our lives, why we're not richer, why we're not happier, whatever it is. That culture of grievance is a false rhetoric that bears little or no resemblance to the actual decency and excellence of the people of North Dakota. And I want them to get over it. I hope they'll read my book because it's a friendly book. And I hope they'll read my book because it's a call for a conversation. What I say at the beginning of the book and what I say at the end is the same. If we think we can just carry on the way we have been and just let the future unfold for us, we're wrong. We have got to be proactive about the future we want, because this is not a place that people move to. You know, people move to Colorado, people move to California, people move to Arizona, people move to Virginia, but people don't move to North Dakota. So you have to have a reason for North Dakota. You have to make that worth people's while to stay or to come. We'll always have a residual population from the stock that's already here. But if you want North Dakota to thrive in the 21st century, you have to make a remote, windswept, long-wintered place groovy or cool in some new way. And that's not going to happen by trotting out the talking points of Sean Hannity. I can promise you that.
A culture of grievance. In the couple of minutes that we have left, I'm going to run a few things by you. I want to start with the title. How did you come up with the title, and what does it mean to you?
North Dakota is the most treeless of all states. We have 362 million trees. Maine has 20 billion trees. We're the most treeless of all states, even more than Nebraska. Our native tree is the cottonwood, and it is a drop-dead gorgeous tree. It was important to Lewis and Clark. It was important to Theodore Roosevelt. It was important to the steamboat era. It was important to the Lakota and the Mandan Hidatsa and the Arikara. And so I wanted to write a book. I'm calling for a new kind of North Dakota consciousness, a spirit of place consciousness, a love of the land, and a desire to protect the resources of North Dakota, just as you would protect Yosemite, just as you would protect Arches National Park. And so I wanted to call it the Language of Cottonwoods because I think that they do have a language. I go out and listen to them in the fall. And if we would stop and realize that we're not the acme of creation, we are a very interesting species that cohabits this planet with a wide range of extremely interesting species. And the hierarchy that sets us apart is what's killing us. That's what's destroying us. That's why we need to heal, and that's what I think is damaging the planet. And so I wanted the title to invite you to ask that question. So what about cottonwoods? I want people to read this book and think, okay, well, I might not agree with this guy. I'm kind of rolling my eyes at some of this, but I get his point. I get his point that we're on an unsustainable path. And if America is on an unsustainable path, North Dakota is on an unsustainable path on steroids.
Huh. I'm going to read yourself back to you for a couple of things here, and then we have to say goodbye for the week. But you wrote, "We are in danger of turning away from nature and leading lives merely of mediated electronic experience. That would be a disaster for North Dakota." And now we've talked about a bunch of the themes in the book. You say there are other themes, but these are the big claims that I make in the book. The book, more than anything, is an argument, but I hope in the best sense of the term, for taking North Dakota more seriously and much less, learning to make fun of ourselves and learning to love the things that are here.
There's a lot of humor in the book, and there's a great deal of irony. You know, you and I have known each other now for a long time, and I'll bet one of the best days we ever had was Valentine's Day out at the Elkhorn Ranch. We went out there with a couple of other friends.
I remember it well.
You would talk about your own family going to a thing called Lone Butte for holidays, and there's a hot tub out there, and you're out there in the middle of nowhere in this hot tub looking around. The stars are out, sometimes northern lights. You hear a coyote calling. That's the magic of North Dakota. And North Dakotans are losing that because we spend time on our devices. We're always looking at a screen, a television screen, a smartphone screen, an iPad screen, a Kindle screen. And then they go from their house into their heated garage, and they get in their car, which is pre-started. They open the garage door, they drive to work. After work, they come back home, they go into the garage. We spend less and less time in the natural world. And it shows. That's why we're so screwy. And so whenever I get out into the Badlands or out onto a bluff, I cheer up, and I can actually chart my mental health by how long it is between trips. And so we're going to lose this, David, because these devices are so compelling. They're so absolutely addictive and compelling that we forget that we are creatures that live in a natural environment. And you can't have that in New York City. You can't really have that in LA. You can have that in spades, in gigantic quantities in Western North Dakota. And we need to cherish that to recover.
Sir, thank you for allowing me to take my limited journalistic training and interview you this week about your new book, The Language of Cottonwoods, Essays on the Future of North Dakota. And with that, sir, we need to say goodbye for this week.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks for indulging us in this conversation. It is a truly Jeffersonian book, and if you love the work that we do, I believe that you will enjoy this book, even if you live in some ridiculous place like North Carolina or Tennessee. Hey, we'll see you all next week.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any show for a $12 donation, please call 701-575-0727. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.com and on Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.com. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Bach Cello Suite No. 3 in C Major by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program, Through the Eyes of Thomas Jefferson.